Hello? Is this thing on? Hello?
Alrighty. How's everyone doing?
Members of the online world and citizens of the 21st century. If you don't already know, my name is Baron Bartholomew Burns III. My sole existence here today relies on encouraging you viewers to understand the controlling and influential systems and strategies around you through entertaining academic history. I currently explore the archived patterns of the human social experience and showcase how current devices in 2023 are indoctrinating its users into their own psychological cult, masterfully controlled by the commoner and the elite. Today will be no different. As always, I have broken into my creator's apartment, locked him away in his own metaphorical prison, and will proceed to use his equipment to attack our topic today.
Yeah, you mean the professional seminar that I have to lead in a graduate level art history class? Something worth 10% of my final grade?
Exactly! Why would you think a bearded white man alone could discuss our heavy dialogue today?
I don't know, maybe if you'd let me out of the box I could show you.
No, why would I do that? If you can't tell, we're about to navigate through the topic on erotic discourses. More so, the identity on identity. If you got kids in the room, I suggest you hit pause and let them turn 18 before pressing play again. Alrighty, are the innocent gone? I sure hope so, cause now I have to apply my creator's perfectionist standard. So I guess I will give a brief summary on what he was trying to say before applying the cultic truth. The art, body, and history of language has prepared all of humanity for the possible infection of ignorant commonality and groomed circumstances. Personally, it seems improbable that this war on accepting expressed identities will end any time in the near future, This is caused by every environmental trigger sponsoring a quasi-antagonistic discourse that tickles the activist bones of every member of a political party or belief system. Common modern relations in academic discussion towards certain subjects such as sexual expression and a fetish appreciation of the human form are structurally radioactive outside specific realms. Oh gosh, this is a mouthful. Brian, what'd you do? This is caused by the systemic issues and societal oppression ingrained in generational culture. This week's discussion will travel through the historical aspects of how a lack of longeval common sense through ideological limitations forced a dismissal of any possibilities for identity to exist outside the norms of the noble hierarchy. This discussion will be supported by analyzing topics from lesbian invisibility in the Italian Renaissance culture, made in 1994 by Patricia Simons, taking position on the erotic in a Renaissance culture, made in 1999 by Bet Televacchia, and the language of courtesans, made in 2008 by Elizabeth Horowitz, there we go, to navigate through the archived coach hypocrisy that humanity still combats with today. Basically, we have multiple resources exploring the academic female perspective on their applied and peer-reviewed research on societal interaction of individualism found within both the Italian and Venetian Renaissance. So, we are specifically going to explore the origins of historical pornography, lesbianism, and the courtesan profession. What should be noted before continuing, though, is that each author mentioned a consistent perspective when venturing into this type of academic discourse that I, Barron, tend to agree with. We cannot apply modern standards to the situations uncovered when analyzing art history from a contemporary lens. This means that 21st century ideas on these specific topics have significantly transformed from this time era. Now, let's get into the good stuff. To understand the basic ideas of cult theory, one must look no further than a simple feat of controlled circumstance, alongside applied individual or group pressure, encouraging the recruitment of new members in order to reach a larger goal. Basically, any amoral marketing can encourage an active choice despite the shady inspiration. Seems like the Renaissance can relate, like philanthropists with their money. All jokes aside, to really understand the totality of this conversation, it must be said, and I believe most of you viewers would agree, that there was some serious, systemically established chaos during the Italian Renaissance. I mean, we have generations of ignorant power sponsoring old methods of control, with new ornate masks producing triple the amount of problems. All because of the natural course of hysterical fear. You get crazy fearful over a situation, you produce your own extreme anxiety and a need to instantly gratify that situation. And it mainly gets solved with an improper use of control without thinking of future consequences. So in regards to our specific subjects, any discussion revolved around the topic of sexual intercourse outside the religiously dictated action of heterosexual reproduction was extremely feared, mainly by men. I mean, seriously, look at this. In some extreme cases, if you didn't follow religious law, it could meet with one's head lopped off their body. And this happened a lot. But Barron, the church was following divine doctrine. Why are you painting them out to be a cult? I'm not. Don't get twisted. I don't want to talk to the Pope looking like this. What I'm trying to capture is that generations of reinterpreted social devices and an overall increase of global crisis freaked the ever-living hell out of people trying to understand how to deal with their daily life. Both men and women of this time frame are living at the peak of ancient dichotomy, dealing with every biblical blood-torn problem under the sun, while attempting to understand their own place in a society its old leaders believed were doing the right thing based on the teachings of their past. In one aspect, it can be suggested that the church assisted in laying a roadmap that allowed humanity to survive during some of its most troubled times. Not to say that there weren't some really interesting things the church did to quote-unquote lead society. This is just unfortunately a time-based discussion, and to understand truly how cult theory has ingrained itself into the devices of modern times, I have to capture the hardest point to chew on throughout the rest of our conversation here. I know there can really never be justification for evil, but if you grew up in this type of environment, how would you react? How would you grow? I am only explaining suggested causes based on the 8 years of academic research my creator has committed himself towards. If you don't believe me, just say hi to Maurice. The noble system, alongside the Church of the Italian Renaissance, led society based on fear, specifically a fear of anything that could smite them from existence. This became the foundation to their strategies. Despite many leaders running severely paranoid lives, following the systemic plan, some understood the conditions of their power and utilized it for personal gain. They saw that they had a local populace, so who better to test an experiment on to determine how really tolerant they were to anything and everything, down towards specific depictions of sexuality. In regards to our first main topic of discussion, the origins of pornography, tolerance is as visible as an Italian jurist's understanding of the female body. Simply put, non-existent. Our first resource, taking positions on the erotic in Renaissance culture, made in 1999 by Bet Talavacchia, takes the reader on an in-depth navigation through what seems to be an ignorant loss of control over what can be an acceptable expression of the nude human form.
Hey, Barron.
What do you want?
Shouldn't you go over some of the base facts of the resource before jumping into the guts? You know, so I can get a good grade?
Fine. Did you know that the word pornography actually did not so much appear until the mid-19th century? The word is derived from the Greek anecdote pornography, archived in the Deep Nosiphestai, an analogy from the Greek author Athenaeus, cultivated in the 2nd century. The term is defined as painters of whores. Pretty blunt, but it became use in the Italian Renaissance because of the many depictions of prostitutes in artistic paintings. The topic of porn is not really what the world understands it to be today from that time frame. Sexual representations and misrepresentations of Renaissance art or artistic devices have consistently been argued as pornographic, with or without the artist's intention, all in an attempt to see if the object discussed could be morally accepted by the systemic pressure and therefore society. Based off this, Talavacchia has presented the first disastrous discourse between artist's intention and noble powers finding quote-unquote systemic issues in artworks. Our first example is the I Modi, made in 1524 by Marcantonio Raimondi. This 20-sheet engraving book showcases various scenes of the nude form engaging in sexual activity in various unique positions, testing the limits of physicality and reproductive form. It was believed that this book was originally a collaboration between Raimondi and another artist, Giulio Romano. There were rumors that suggested Raimondi based his engravings on the commissioned erotic paintings Romano was hired to create. Alas, Raimondi was arrested for his work as he lived in a palpable state and presented it to the public eye. Once the church and other elites discovered the existence of Aimodi, they proposed two problems with this piece and its teachings. The first was, any unsanctioned and fanciful position is sinful, anything outside natural reproduction. Second, identifying and condemning any sinful position frustrates the idea of procreation. To cement this limitation, his own mentor, Giorgio Vasari, found this to be an unacceptable depiction of proper sexual representation, as the imagery painted a promiscuous and sinful experience rather than a tasteful visual. It's interesting because Talavacchia notes how he specifically attacks the men in Aimodi rather than the women. Vasari continues to highlight how extremely erotic this piece was, as it mainly represented shameful men, or specifically the term disonesto, shameless, or uomini disonesti, shameless men. It's interesting they don't even refer to women, as it might relate to the common notion that the woman is more than an object, when they really wanted to focus on something not to worry about, as the man is the one in control. So we have in one section of this resource a critique on the depiction of human blasphemy, when society during this time frame was pretty much engaging in a lot of promiscuous acts. This was the cause of a lot of disdain between commentators, elite, and the church. But they have people like Giovanni da Udine manipulating fruits and forage in pieces like Venus, Ceres, and Juno, made in 1517, and it was considered a tasteful visual of sexual organs draped across a nude Venus. Many commentators elaborated how the image itself was not erotic per se, but more so a playful rendering of reproductive divinity. The underlying point is that there was a vague yet fine-painted line between what was and was not systemically acceptable sexual representation. However, disrupt the strategies of the church and discover your reputation defamed or your head rolling across the floor. This was the chaotic hysteria nobility controlled and profited from. The unfortunate aspect was that they used their local population to test and reveal the chinks in their system's armor in an attempt to repair and gain more control. This means at any given time, power could have been sponsored and dominated by any commoner. And access to filtered education did not mean a noble person was more worthy than another. It just meant that they followed the generational game, set out to propose more power, a troubling aspect in the foundation of a cult. Modern depictions of cults do not necessarily cater to the entire theory. Yes, we have seen examples from the 1970s forward on numerous groups rising and falling in Western society, but what was not openly talked about is the how and why. Ignorance plus disassociation from mass hysteria plus a group that is somehow magically able to act within the confounds of society outside its limitations equals a chance to indoctrinate a cult member. This is represented in almost every human social experience that resides inside a systemic regime, such as any discussion around the female and her body. The noble system of this era has generationally groomed society to encourage a faux fact that women are nothing more than subservient reproductive objects of gaze and should feel worthy of the position. Doing so gives them access to filtered education and slight status, as they could give birth to a son that carries on the father's lineage. This requires absolute silence, the face of the goddess Venus, childbearing hips, and a desire to serve her husband and his god. Anything outside these parameters could be met with the labeling of hysterics or witchcraft, and could be committed or again beheaded. If you can't tell, there's a pretty consistent common norm here. However, with multiple generations of consistency, it seems that society forgot about women. They became common objects, as if they were sitting on the shelf for their user to find significance in their existence again. They spent years during history, especially during the Italian Renaissance, watching men and their leaders engage in any promiscuous act and find justification in their deeds because it came from a phallic body. This led them to find inspiration in discovering what they could and could not engage in within their male-led limitations. Our second resource, Lesbian Invisibility in Italian Renaissance Culture, made in 1994 by Patricia Simons, allows us to see her perspective on how the European male elite and the church absent-mindedly dismissed the idea that the female body also has emotions, desires, and instincts. Eventually, it was suggested that the order simply believed consistency was cemented and women would follow their lead, and they did, more so than they asked for. But this caused these women to be left in a state of static animation, repeating the same cycle and role given to them millennia before. They had followed by example from states of innocent ignorance, believing they were respecting their limitations and abiding by societal law. It's morbidly ironic that after years of loyal subservience, that the male-led system would believe that half of their population would remain chaste tools in their reproductive and husbandry tool belt after being forgotten. But once these institutions began experiencing their society's women attempting their own sexual exploration, it was again met with more tests and strategies to dominate and control what could be allowed. Simons indicates that egotistical male fear towards anything expressed by a woman outside the bounds of heterosexuality was a threat to the patriarchal order. From there, she supports her argument through multiple examples of this power struggle, with situations revolving around both a term called donna con donna, or female-to-female relationships, and individual female pleasure. This is where things take an interesting turn. Simons points out that there's actually no factual evidence coming from any female voice on any of these topics. Only what is captured in male-rendered literary, litigious, and artistic depictions. Based on this, I have prepared a wonderfully educational summary from the Italian courts on how, quote-unquote, tolerant they were. You might laugh. I hope you do. Education's supposed to be fun. So according to the Italian courts, as long as a woman met her reproductive requirements with her husband, any donna con donna relationships or individual acts that resulted in rubbing was deemed tolerable, however, delicately punishable, as these situations in nature did not disrupt the noble and godly idea of sexual intercourse, but was still an expression of female pleasure. Let's just sit on that for a bit. Then we have the Italian jurist Prospero Farinacci, who believed that any situation that resulted in the use of an artificial phallus, donna con donna or individual, was met with the label of a witch and was punishable by death, due to the fact that this phallus does not emit male semen in an attempt of procreation. Like, I have to keep reminding myself not to apply modern perspective here. But like you, I am trying to swim through this fog of confusion on where the line makes sense. It really doesn't. But this again is a time-based discussion. It is supposed to showcase how people reacted towards their societal stigma and what was deemed a crisis. One possible answer to this confusion is again the concept of cult theory, and it is simply the manipulation of social devices in order to reach a larger goal. Most of the time, cults again are not blatant representations of drinking the Kool-Aid. They can be financial, educational, systemic, cultural, anything in life that can guide you to commit a dangerous act on a mental or physical level. Any thoughts or severe limitations of personal expression can guide anyone to fall into a confusing aftermath in this bloody feat over power and control. Breaking the cycle is the only chance for individuals to achieve true self-reflection and understanding. Finding consistency in yourself before seeking it with the world. How this relates to the consistency between artistic pornography and female sexual exploration is anything could be tolerated as long as it did not disrupt heterosexual procreation and the elite order. The other consistency, though, is systemic powers lack longeval common sense as they neglected the existence of half the human population for generations. In turn, these powers created their own societally infected source of artificially enhanced anxiety, birthed from their own ignorance. One sponsored issue is masked by 3 more in an attempt for any quick and immediate resolution to the threats of the current order. Both Simons and Talvakia together create a perspective that indicates how every human, despite status or gender, fell victim to their own temptations and began experimenting within the confounds of general law and limitations to release aforementioned anxiety. This led to what could have become the ultimate threat to the patriarchy if they were more uninformed towards the human body than what has been exclaimed. Courtesans controlling their quote-unquote worthy release. Our third and final source, The Language of Courtesans, made in 2008 by Elizabeth Horodowicz, gonna do that again, guides the reader through the historical importance of the female courtesan. This profession was neutral ground between female expression and male control. Ultimately, the sole existence of the courtesan was murky in nature, but marginally enhanced society as they engaged in a practice that was deemed blasphemous, however, socially acceptable. Courtesans understood their position in patriarchal society and ingeniously adapted to their situations in order to properly gain status and power as they received education on their profession and how to specifically interact with the noble elite. They fashioned themselves to the aesthetic and symbolism of the goddess Venus and the Virgin from Venetian iconography to slightly dominate their objectification and use it towards their own benefit. They were masters of the spoken word. They commanded fascination and admiration with their speech, but were sometimes met with persecution and marginalization. After all, they were engaged in sinful deeds. And there was a fine line between a courtesan and a prostitute. Their mastery of the spoken word also means they understood the correct audience to present it to, as sometimes they were echoed by the magistrates and the elite as an attempt to encourage civil stability. In this time frame, an attempt was made and was successful in secret, as we can never know who truly spoke the words that brought upon peace. Was it truly the systemic powers? This representation showcases how one can understand their unfortunate situation and overcome the systemic issues in a fashion that allows them to exist in some type of caliber. It's murky, misogynistic, and repressive that this was a prominent route for women. But nonetheless, it provided some type of purpose and status. To modern standpoints, it could seem this profession could be a cult, but based on historical accuracy, it was a less lethal dose of poison than the average treatment of a female. An example of a state of innocent ignorance that can be applied to many contemporary examples to all people across history. After all, most male artists of this time were considered expressive, an era-based trait of femininity, but received purpose and status from their creations as long as they respected elitist limitations. As a final note, the perspective explored so far personally suggests that this profession should not warrant complication, as it could be an active example of the foundation of the erotic discourse, a topic that gingerly touches the line of controversy, a seductive innuendo that encapsulates anyone experiencing it. Ultimately, what should be underlined from this entire discussion is how our modern understanding of each of these topics has significantly transformed since the Italian Renaissance. However, it can be suggested that certain aspects of past systemic ideology and ignorance currently exist, as its massed integration of strategies are still being introduced into Western law, society, and technology. On a global scale, though, hello. Of course I'm going to assist him in processing this information. I'm not sorry. Jesus. So, as a final note, I failed to remind you of the significance of why I, Barron to the B, have presented this topic through the lens of cult theory. It is to simply remind everyone that you are who you are, regardless of the indoctrinating influence that swarms our disassociative world and its global history. Take everything with a grain of salt and rely on your instincts. We need to use manipulated social devices as tools, not lifestyle controlling agents, or else you will forget people in our human species again and face the aftermath of what we considered before as problematic systemic situations.
Oh, buddy, we're already there.
Seriously? Then why are you people watching me? Go do something self-fulfilling. Read a book upside down. Learn the Swedish language. Catch a wild meerkat, cause I'm done and I'm out of here.
Wait! Aren't you gonna let me out of the box?